Alrighty, so today I'm going to be responding to a claim that stated that the death penalty fails to provide benefits for society. The secondary claims are that the death penalty is not economically viable. The second secondary claim is that there are political difficulties. And the third is that the death penalty does not actually deter crime. The death penalty, starting off with, the death penalty is not economically viable. It was previously stated that the death penalty in Texas costs about $2.3 million, which is 3 times the cost of imprisonment for 40 years. Although when looking at this source, the information is dated back to 1992, which is over 20 years old, and therefore a false representation of current cost. According to the LA Times, the price for each inmate has doubled since 2005, even though overcrowding has reduced the population by 1/4. Salaries and benefits for prison guards and medical providers has attributed to these costs. And what does that tell us? That keeping high-risk prisoners, like those that would be eligible for the death penalty, means hiring highly trained security guards and task force with the highest of medical insurance due to the exposure of the high-risk and high-need prisoners. Therefore, spending much more money on the staff that is equipped to handle the most dangerous prisoners. Another piece of evidence that was presented in efforts to prove that the death penalty is not economically viable was that the death penalty takes money away from other funds because, according to Richard Dieter, the author of Millions Misspent, Florida gave 3,000 early release of criminals, but there is no correlation that the death penalty costs were the cause of early release inmates. Furthermore, the claim that the death penalty takes money away from other funds is faulty because there was no evidence of there ever being any money allocated, for example, cancer research or any other organization that it was taken from that fund to fund the death penalty. Moving on to my next point, it was stated that the death penalty causes political difficulties. That claim that there was political difficulties is not exclusive to that issuing of the death penalty. This too can be true of abortion, abolishing the electoral college, trying children as adults, and the list continues. This secondary claim has no effect on whether the death penalty fails to provide benefits to society. There was a statistic presented that stated that only 33% of the Boston residents supported the death penalty of the bomber, who is now facing federal charges for detonating 2 bombs during a Boston Marathon. But this data shows no evidence to prove that the death penalty proposes political difficulties. The last secondary claim was that the death penalty does not actually deter crime. It was mentioned that Hong Kong is a colony that capital punishment has been abolished, whereas Singapore has a mandatory death sentence for murder and other crimes. The statement says that there is little difference between the 2 Asian metropolises. Looking back at the evidence, little difference was never further defined, failing to prove anything other than there is little difference in anything. The opponent's evidence also included a Huffington Post poll. It is unsure of how the data was collected or presented and how large of the population of this poll was. The subjective opinions of a small group of civilians lack to support the claim that death penalty fails to provide benefits to society. Now, recapping on the previous points, there's severely old data that claims that death penalty costs are X amount of money. Political difficulties are an essential component within a political system and have no correlation to support that it does not provide benefits to society. Lastly, the death penalty does not actually deter crime. It is a claim that did not have any factual data. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, it's easy to follow. You set up the structure so we know exactly where you're headed. You're just going to go directly and attack the grounds that the advocate is providing. You go after the first study for it being old data, which I think is fine. The thing that makes your argument a little bit stronger is a demonstration that the costs of incarceration have increased substantially, and then you also make an inference that says, look, these are high-risk prisoners which are going to need even more specialized guarding and protection. So that seems to suggest that the costs are probably going to be certainly as high, if not higher, than it might be to execute somebody. There's not really much explanation about why the cost for execution is so high, and I think that there might be some argument about that as well, but it doesn't go anywhere, so it's not that big a deal. You do challenge the notion that there was a release of prisoners due to the cost of the death penalty. The advocate's evidence doesn't say that, at least according to you, and you challenge the notion that there is any other connection, that we've given up funding something in order to have the death penalty. I think that you could use a little bit of data about what the state's resources are, what the federal government's resources are, and show how much they're actually spending on the death penalty, so we could see in contrast that in fact it is not likely to be a significant impact on any other programs. The political difficulties thing, you basically come down to the point that says, wow, that's like saying we're talking about something that's controversial. Yes, it's controversial, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be deciding it. We should be deciding whether or not it has a benefit or it has a harm to us. And I think what you need to do is make a stronger argument for a potential benefit on the argument, which gets us to the third point. Basically, on your third point, you're pressing the evidence that the advocate used without providing any evidence of your own to suggest that there might in fact be a benefit. There's a lot of research that suggests, both from a theoretical level, based on a particular experience, statistically, and using a variety of models, that the death penalty can in fact have a deterrent effect. I'm not sure why you would hesitate to use some information like that to directly contradict the position. Instead, you kind of just you press this Hong Kong Singapore comparison, and then you press the poll that the Huffington Post did, which I'm not exactly sure I would take as a valid measure of deterrence anyway. I thought you had a good summary of what your argument was, and you kind of dismissed the advocate's points by suggesting that they aren't adequately developed and proven. And this is a pretty good press. I just think that there are places that you missed some low-hanging fruit. Thank you.